So welcome to our first video podcast, and this is the part where Paul and I talk about what we're going to talk about, and
That's very philosophical. We're going to talk about what we're going to talk about. I like that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Validation.
I actually like that, yeah.
And we're going to try to be reasonably close to the mic as like one of our best friends, but that's going to be a little bit of a challenge to get used to, of course. Healthy habits, healthy living, life hacks. These are some of the core topics and themes that we are striving to touch on with the Inside Out Life podcast. So, here's one thing just to kind of throw it out there is that, I feel like so many of us want to do more with our lives and want to explore. And I as I've come to know you, I know that's a pretty safe statement that you can apply personally.
Yes, definitely. Definitely, yeah.
And what might you like to tell us about that?
Well, I like delving into the nature of what it is to be human. Just like, maybe I'm just a partial existentialist, part philosopher, part who knows, but I've just been fascinated with that inner journey. Yeah, absolutely. Most of my life, but really, yeah, that's how I would say that. And a big part of that has been the practice of mindfulness, the practice of awareness. To really roll up your sleeves and go inside and see what's real, see what part is you, see what part is our attachments and things like that, and to discern one from the other. Yeah, I'm interested in the subject of the wholeness of a human being. We always say, oh, I'm only human and we're human. That's partly true. That's half true. We're actually human beings. And so many of us, me included, often forget about the being part. The being gets pushed off to the side. It's like, oh yeah, But really, it's our primary realm. It's the primary part of us, really. The most important part, really.
I've been teaching and guiding, coaching, practicing in the arena of mind-body health for a couple of decades now, and only in the last few months did I really put this idea together that when I'm trying to share and offer people the tool to proper breathing, inspire deeply and think about the cycle of your breath and breathe in oxygen and newness and some of these kind of visuals. But really what I've landed on recently is not just, what your meter is, how long to breathe in, to take a pause, but not really hold the breath, just pause with the breath, and then slowly expel the air, and then pause again before beginning the cycle again. Is the idea that breathe in power and healing, and then, as we'll say maybe in some guided breathing technique classes, breathe out and let go, release any carbon dioxide or negative energy, whatever you want to say. But to me recently, the idea of really trying to get people to be aware of taking that breath in will set up that release and that let go, but really it's the power that goes with it. Maybe the reset, the renewal. But this was just such an exciting moment for me. It's like, oh, I can say it concisely to people. Now we all need to practice how to breathe and to be mindful of our breathing, but that was something that I landed on recently, and I got pretty excited about the idea of breathing in power or even healing. I think those two are very relatable to all of us as beings, as human beings.
Yeah.
Almost as a life skill. And that's something that I thought we would talk about too, is that, you know, you've used the analogy of, you know, fishing, you know, catch a fish or learn how to fish.
Right.
And so these, you know, life skills, learning how to fish, learning how to breathe, and being aware of our breath, those things are, I think, really important to share with others.
They absolutely are, and I've learned a fair amount too about breathing over the years. Just I wasn't breathing right for many years. I still don't breathe right if I catch myself. It's for that very shallow kind of, you know, everyone thinks their lungs are just up here. They go way down, and they're big. And the diaphragmatic breathing, you know, have you ever practiced a diaphragmatic breathing where it's not so much in or out, it's down, up and down like a piston. You do 5 or 6 of those deep ones, like you were saying a minute ago, and you sort of pause in between. So a 4 or 5 second inhale, pause, 6 second exhale, pause for a few seconds in between. You start over, and it just you feel just instantly grounded. Absolutely. That's typically how I recommend almost kicking off a meditation. Much like a football game, you know, it starts with the kickoff. So these deep breathing is how we kick off the meditation, and then you let the breathing kind of go wherever it goes. But you can take the breathing anywhere. You can take it into an airport, you can take it into a boardroom, you can take it into a grocery store lineup. And if you find yourself getting angry or anxious, you've got that breathing.
Right, and you made me think of technology there for a moment, because how I related that is when you get the email that you're triggered by, and that you're going to respond to in sort of your crude, base, raw, you know, moment.
Yeah. Because
you're worked up, you're hot.
Absolutely.
But then, if you do, you know, in our sensible, level-headed way, and we're like, okay, I'm a little out of control. I'm a little bit, you know, triggered at this moment.
Yeah.
Maybe I should take a breath. Maybe I should count to 10. And my perspective may change.
Yeah, absolutely. They call it that, like the stop gap. So the stop, take a breath, observe your reactions, proceed. You know, it's exactly what that is, just a bit of a framework for that. Not always easy, though. When you're in the moment, is it? It's kind of like, sometimes it requires 20, 30 breaths. Sometimes it requires a walk or two around the block, depending on what's going on. But one thing for sure is, and I think you touched on this a minute ago when you were describing your new understanding of breathing. There is an element of truth to bringing in that spaciousness.
Keela.
Okay.
I think, I don't know when it cut off, but...
It's on now. It's blinking.
I noticed, so thank you.
There is an element of truth to bringing in that spaciousness into an issue, like you were saying earlier. You're bringing in healing. I forget what words you use, but say power. Okay, so for me, I can bring in spaciousness and presence and healing, and exhale some of that tightness. But I have to be careful though, because if you start to involve the mind, our supercomputer mind, it perks up, and now it's monitoring. Is this getting better? Am I getting better? I need to calm down. And then that creates a whole new thing. So for me, it's more about the inputs and not so much the result or the output. In other words, bring in the breath, bring in the spaciousness, have it meet the stress, exhale, and just leave it at that. And usually it actually does calm down. I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but if we start to set it up so that we start to go, okay, well, I better calm down, or I remember this and last time I didn't calm down, then you're back in the mind again, and the mind's a very powerful tool. So
yeah, and the mind has a tendency, as all of us as human beings have experienced, is to just keep on keeping on, and we're sometimes looking for a way to involve that off switch.
Yeah.
So I'm going to attempt our little introduction now, and you know, I really want to land also on the problem with technology in our world as well as it relates, you know. So, with that said, welcome everybody to the Inside Out Life podcast, where we'll talk about healthy living habits, life hacks, mental, physical health, and today we'll talk about breaths and a little bit of spirituality, the realm there, and learning some great life skills for our computer technology world that we are so wrapped up in with those emails, those trigger emails that we get. And I'm grateful to have here with me Paul Coulombe, who is a mindfulness teacher and also working on a book about human being.
That's right.
And the fullness of it all.
Yeah.
So when I talk about like how prevalent is it when you have students in your class, do you sense that technology is a challenge for, say, being present and in the moment? To what end are we often finding ourselves in an extreme or in an addictive sense, in an unhealthy way or habit?
Oh, absolutely. That's definitely happening. I mean, the human creature was like that before. With it, we don't need much to get our minds going, and now it's a blizzard of options and images and stimulus and all kinds of different things. So, I mean, you just see it in today's youth. Not just the youth, actually. That's not quite true. I see it in a lot of people even my age, just constantly going like this. And I think it's so hard to know exactly what it's doing, but we're compulsive creatures, and we identify very, very, very quickly with the idea of what's going on out there and how we feel inside. And our brains are referential. They triangulate our position, which means I'm over here and they're up or down. And this whole thing plays into that. It doesn't have to, but it does. It's easy to fall into. And so I see that everywhere. I mean, my kids constantly scrolling through Instagram and constantly on their devices, not just one, several. Doing homework with the computer open, Skyping with another one, and the TV on in the background.
Right.
There's a lot of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Multitasking, we wear it like a badge of honor.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of become an unfortunate social statement in a way. And I think, what's coming first here, us trying to take some control back with trying to be more at ease with ourselves and practicing something like mindfulness or, and trying to be more in the moment. Ironically, to let go so we can feel more in control. Or is it that we are so reactive now and triggered by being overstimulated by all that there is, going down the rabbit hole, as it were, by looking at one thing and having something else grab our attention? Where this sort of starts and stops, and what the fundamental issue is how do we, do a reset in terms of balancing and unplugging and going low tech to build up the power of our breath, because that's going to be a reference point again as we continue to talk. How do you see it, Paul?
I want to go back to a word you just used. You said the magic word "let go," and there's an expression. I found it. I saw it online dealing with OCD, and it's like "let go or get dragged." There's a lot of wisdom in that. That's the first step. But the trouble with letting go with something like, if we're going to talk about electronics and social media, is because there's something deeply. I mean, that's the hook. But the barb in the hook is our identity has manifested itself somewhere in there. And we don't want to let go because we feel like part of us, we've just got to see what everybody else is doing and what someone has, says, or does, And again, we triangulate our so-called, and I'm using air quotes here, worth in that, and it's not accurate, but we just do it anyways. So, like, let me just recap. We absolutely need to let go and use these devices as tools, and you would just use it like a tool. You take a knife out, you cut cut the bread and you put it back in its sheath. We take the phone out, we do X, Y, Z, we set up a meeting, and we put it back. Now, we're not doing that. We're using it compulsively. Excuse me. But because there's a me wrapped up in there somewhere. That's the real, I think that's the root of it. At least that's my perception of it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be so consumed with it. It in some way occupies us and means something to us. To many people so badly. Well, what could be so important? What could be so important about somebody else's posting, or whether someone got invited to a party or a comment online? It's because there's a little me in it that feels so threatened and so diminished, or it longs for something so much. And, I always hear about people posting their holidays on Facebook or wherever. And somebody else, that's great, somebody posts it, and somebody else somewhere looks at it and goes, well, I never go anywhere, and look at all the fun they're having. It's all relational. It's them versus me, and I just think it's very illusional, actually, as well. Yeah.
And it's sort of whether you believe the statistics about mental health challenges that have really accelerated and amplified in the last couple of decades or not, the numbers certainly bear out in terms of the limitless levels of anxiety, depression, traumas. Certainly in terms of the anxiety and the depression, this is enabling. The technology is, the question is technology for good or bad. And you're going to have a very divided room when you open up for that forum. What is the life skill, and now there's some kind of way to track how many hours you are engaging with the technology on a given day.
Well, just like even to that point, Barry, it's not that the technology itself is bad or good. It's our relationship to it, right? Is if we use it like a tool, just like we're using technology now to record this. That's great, like searching up things and planning for the future and sending email, calendar invites, and Outlook, and that's all fine. It's just, how do we not take it to that next step? It's a razor's edge from that into just constantly, and that's the part really that I think is unhealthy.
Well, and then maybe within that more specifically is the social media platform where you can post your pictures and how many friends you have. And when we're having one of our vulnerable moments, and as a voyeur, we go in and we just observe these things, maybe we feel worse about ourselves. And that's been a chain of events that can happen, and a consequence of that, I think. And as a lot of experts have talked about, it's like, how do we, because we can be prone to some kind of compulsion or addiction, and it shows up in different ways and in different places, whether it's we're eating too much or drinking too much or in excess in some other habit that is otherwise unhealthy for us. It's like, how do we take a bit of control back? How do we have some awareness over, when do I cut myself off in terms of how much time I should look at my device in a day? These are real issues that we're faced with in 2020 and beyond, and the direction that we're going, and trying to look at important issues like the environment and and having personal connections, because people aren't having personal connections the way they used to, and how is Generation Z or Z, however you want to say it, how are they growing up now, sitting in classrooms with people right beside them, but it's as if they're sitting by themselves because they're so wrapped up. Kayla?
They
awesome.
Under the guise of connecting, or they can certainly be isolating. That's for sure, absolutely. But I think it actually goes back. I'm one of those guys that likes to go right to the bottom line, like right to the root of it. Right? Say with technology, right? Even before technology, go back 100 years. The root of that human struggle is there's something missing in my life. Something wrong, there's a wrongness or a missing. And it radiates from there. So so the human mind will go, oh well, I'll fill it with money, and I'll fill it with work, and I'll eat, and I'll find a relationship to fill it, and I'll travel, and I'll distract myself. So that was all happening before. But now, when you layer on modern, are you kidding? Talk about a distraction? Now, it's almost like this attempt to get this missingness filled. And it never quite works, ever. And maybe it does short term, but it always fails. So now we've just added one more spoke to the wheel. We now have social media. We can occupy endless hours of anything, believing that we're going to just fill this somehow. And we have to catch ourselves. I think we have to catch ourselves and find that feeling and realize that, you know what? You can only actually have that fulfilled from the inside out, and not the outside in. Kind of the name of your company, right? Inside Out. It actually very much is like that. And then I guess where I'm going with this is, once you have that fullness from the inside out, then you can use these things and honor them for what they are. There's a tool, there's some food, there's a party in relationships, there's some alcohol, whatever. It's nice to go gambling once in a while. But they become addictions very quickly, just like social media. Mm-hmm. When that me is tied up in that. Whereas if your me is already in the fullness of being, and that's your identity, then you're free to use these things as you please, and they take a secondary importance in your life. That's my perspective on that. Yeah.
So I was mentioning earlier that having some tools to bring things back into control and into balance. I think that's another way to say what you were just saying. I think is where we don't get to too many extremes too often, where it becomes a real downward accelerated spiral. Is life skills like how to check in with our breath and combat anxiety. Because from a mental health perspective, this is a pandemic. Anxiety is everywhere and is touching everyone. Just about every day, chances are. So, it's learning coping mechanisms. And here's something that may or may not directly tie in. I'm gonna just say I wrote down some numbers. Okay, so 23,000 breaths we take in a day, and approximately 8 million breaths in a year.
Really?
If we're a healthy human, and we can say we survived another year, there's 23,000 breaths we'll take in a day, and then multiply that by 365, and you get a figure like 8 million. Go ahead and punch it on your calculators.
Wow. You live to 100, there's 80 million.
So,
wow.
I guess it just kind of gives us that moment of pause to say, as you just responded, and it's like, this is, the breath is that moment of power and healing, that it gives us all that potential and that lightness and that renewed force, if you will, and just seeing things from in a whole new light, and taking breaths, so having that power and that healing, and really what I want to say, and I'm kind of rambling a bit with the message, but it's having the life skill to call upon the awareness to breath, to get control. Thanks for bearing with me on that one, but to get control. And this is where you come in for a variety of reasons, but how does mindfulness relate to this?
Well, it relates very much, actually. Mindfulness, the breath is used to, it's not so much in mindfulness, it's not so much control and sort of power with the breath. What it does, quite simply, is the breath keeps you in the now. So in other words, the breath moves along every second and a half. We could have been doing this 1,000 years ago. We don't need a wristwatch. We don't have to keep time because you're with the breath, right? So in mindfulness, one of the tenets of mindfulness, there's three main elements to mindfulness.
Yes.
One is on purpose. You have to show some intention for it. In the present moment, this is where the breathing comes in, and non-judgmental. So it has sort of the middle run. So when you stay in the now, you're already, that's kind of like, that's where all the good stuff is in the now. And the breath is typically in the now. I don't know if I've really explained that very well, but there are many elements, there are many other reasons why we use the breath. It's tactile. You could say, well, Paul, can't you just say a mantra, breath, and say breath over and over, breath, breath, breath? Well, you'd have some success, but this is much more powerful because when you're actually focusing on the experience of breathing, you can feel it tactile, that sense in your nose. Okay, so it moves on every second and a half. It keeps you in the now. You're able to focus on it better because it's tactile. You could even go on and say, well, it's a symbol of that spaciousness that's our being, our presence, our spirit. And it's also good for you. It releases physiologically. It does release, the good chemicals, the good hormones. There's actually four main reasons, but the first two really are primarily why we use it in meditation. It flows along in the moment, keeps us there, and it's tactile. And it's interesting because I'm asked this question quite often. It's like, well, there's all this kind of information out there about why we use the breath and mindfulness, and really, it comes down, it's as simple as that. Like, for example, to keep you in there, I can't ask you to breathe 2 minutes ago right now, because it's come and gone, right? I can't ask you to breathe 1 minute from now right now, because it hasn't happened yet. But the breath is always in the now, and that's the gateway to this the fullness of being, I would say, yeah.
And I like how also, in addition to talking about in the now, I know you talk about intention as well, and being very present with that experience of taking the breath in through your nose and just feeling that tactile sense. But it's also like this kind of non-judgment piece as well.
Yes.
And I think what we need to learn, and this is a bit of my own slight editorial, is that we cultivate a society or a community where we can feel safe, because that's the only way that we can give and receive that non-judgment is to create this safe space, and do more kind of conscious breath as well. I think would be a step forward, really.
Well, yeah, as far as the safe space, I think I like to reverse it in my mind. It's a sacred space, and it's found inside us. That's really where it's at. And we just forget it. We all do. We're so busy, we're so focused, we're so stressed. That goes right out the window.
Yeah.
and yet it's the most important piece. We're strange creatures.
And starting from the inside out, as you said earlier.
There you go.
My point, though, I
Mhm.
think, in how it differs, not that it's just an extension of a broader discussion about, how can I feel at ease with myself? Well, if I am aware that I can trust my environment a little bit more in the external sense,
I see, yes.
I think
Yes.
that can also cultivate so much power and
Yes.
potential,
Yeah, definitely.
so
Definitely.
that I can practice taking this risk. Because
Yes.
like, for how many people, the idea of and I think this is kind of the last bit that we'll talk about for now is letting go. That's such a scary notion. Yet when we look at things intellectually and we gather and we're collectors of relationships and behaviors and abuse and traumas and not decluttering our physical space.
Yeah.
What's the healthiest thing we can do? Well, let go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, easy for you to say.
Yes. Yes. And you make a good point about the space. If we actually could cultivate more spaces in our offices and our schools to make time to practice the fullness of being, to practice presence, really, to practice awareness, that would go a long way. Imagine having these conversations in our school systems, in our governments, in our workplaces. Some companies do that, right? Google, I think, has spaces for meditation. There's a number of other companies out there. But yeah, pretty important. Yeah.
Important. It just sort of reinforces my earlier comment about low tech and high tech. I mean, I think us kind of, having 8 hours straight without looking at a computer or device is going to give us so much more back in terms of being mindful, being present, being in the now. So it's like we need to build that into our own personal routine, curriculum, and habits, and share that with others as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think part of the mindfulness with computers is just monitoring throughout the day what our relationship is to it, right? Are we using it or is it using us? And just constantly asking that question. It could be a slight discernment. Sometimes we don't know. They're marbled together. But that's when you sort of pull back from it. And in mindfulness, you would name that. You'd go, you know what? I think I've marbled this together. I'm on my computer and I'm doing all this stuff. But it unmarbles when you give it space. And then you can, own what's yours and then use it as a tool this way. I think there's no really easy answers. There's no formula. But it's more of an art than anything else, practicing that, especially in this day and age. But just using this technology as tools and monitoring yourself when you become ensnared by them and say, it's no longer a useful tool anymore, it's using me. Right? I can't get off work. I'm on holidays and I'm on my iPad and I'm constantly working. Well, you have to come to that conclusion yourself, right? Each person is in a different place, so each person has to ask themselves that. Yeah.
Well, trying to think of a clever metaphor for, we've just skimmed the subject line on the email to like a whole class curriculum, or not a series of podcasts that could happen to continue this discussion about life skills and healthy habits and kind of that inside out kind of doing a bit of that practice and that work, and allowing that experience to happen, to let go, to forsake fear and take a bit of a risk. Because for me, how I apply it in my life right now is to think of future self. And I recently met up with a colleague who referred to doing the hardest thing in the morning, getting it out of the way, as eating a frog. It's just a kind of a colorful expression. I don't know where that comes from,
Yeah.
but it kind of sticks with you because I guess we don't want to eat frogs for breakfast.
Yeah.
Or maybe, yeah, we don't want it, but we know we have to. So, you know, just finding some healthier pathways for our own mental health and sharing that with others, and taking the breath and being aware of the breath and the power that breath has to transform us, to help us to feel reset, renewed. And like there's all kinds of hope and potential that lies ahead, rather than that kind of bleak momentary trigger hot button moment we had when we got that email that, you know, we felt like we were going to have this snap response to, and we felt out of control.
Definitely. And I think, you know, taking those pauses, whether it's 1 breath, 10 breaths, whether it's a walk around the block, when we clear our mind, usually things begin to settle in perspective, right? Like instead of all being marbled with being annihilated somehow because of this email or whatever the trigger was, the problem's still there, but it's taken another level. It's been downgraded because I think it's becomes just one part of the wholeness. You know what I mean? I'm not really explaining that well, but it gets downgraded because our identity isn't wrapped up in it. I think that's partly what the real root of it is. Not that we'll ever actually get there 100%. We're not robots, but
Well, it's the journey, and it's fun to contemplate that with you and your experience, and just sort of share with each other. If you're watching in video format, a little shout out and hello to you out there in video land. Thank you for coming along for the ride. It's that journey, and you know, wishing you a lot of power and healing. It seems to be a couple of buzzwords. Paul Coulombe, a pleasure to see you again, my friend and colleague. So,
thanks,
you know,
Barry.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me. Absolutely.
We'll look forward to
that meditation, and you got it.
And mindfulness and being present, creating that non-judgmental environment. Hopefully people can you know, take something away from this.
I hope so. Great. Thank you very much.